I thought I would jump on and talk a little bit more about the recent finding, the recent expose, as I like to think about it, that the VAT, the raid on the independent schools that was meant to, well, support an ailing or failing state sector, education sector. Well, it looks like it's not going there at all. It looks like, in fact, it is going to be funneled into housing. And it's not that people don't need houses, of course they do. And it's not that people shouldn't find themselves in safe, secure, clean, dry environments. Of course they do. That is not what the issue is. I believe the issue is twofold. One, we were lied to. And secondly, we are harming children. And I have a real issue with a lot of this stuff, because more and more, to me, it would seem as if Labour, they're not Labour. They have lost their way in terms of what I believe a lot of people would expect of them. We find ourselves in uncharted territory, in seas where it would seem there be monsters. It is just monstrous what is going on. And let's then focus on one thing, because I've already talked about how damaging this has been, this VAT, the taking away of the so-called tax break, which it isn't. I've alluded to that already. It's not. So essentially making it more expensive for people to get to school, children to get to school, get to private, independent schools. And because of that, of course, thousands of children have been displaced. And I fear, I worry about this, because it is easy, of course, to look at those families, those children, and say, well, if you can be there, you can afford it. If you can afford it, then probably means that you're not very nice because you're rich, etc. And that real base thinking, that them and us thinking, is not only incorrect, in my opinion, it is also, of course, what some, at least in government, are happy for you to think. The more emotional they can make you, then the more binary our thinking becomes. And they're keen, of course, some of them, not all, for us to be essentially squabbling and fighting amongst ourselves. Because if we're into them and us territory, right and wrong, then we're not paying attention to what they're doing. And so any agitation that this may have caused can in some ways benefit some people. But I implore you, if you do think that the private schools are populated by people who are not nice or snobs or toffs or whatever way we might describe them, then to consider that maybe not all of them are, at least to begin there. And also to consider that a lot of people who've sent their children to those schools have worked darned hard. And I think where society can go wrong, and I believe that Labour will be the first to talk about this, is when we focus on difference, when we think about, again, to come back to that phrase, them and us. They are different. They are not like us. There's something else. And that is just fundamentally obscene, to consider people who may have some money, and a lot of them don't have that much money at all, but may have some money and want something better for their kids, should in some ways be penalised. And when we do that with other people, we other them, we can to a degree dehumanise them. There's much talk about immigration, there's much talk about being welcoming, there's much talk about us needing to ensure that we do not look at others and just other them. and consider them to be so different from us, they're less than us. And I agree with that. We have to focus more on character. We have to extend the hand of friendship and get to know people in most situations. Not in every situation. I still believe it's important to defend or protect, but that's a different story. And so, to humanize this, be aware that, maybe you already were aware, that if we look at one particular group in amidst those children who now have been displaced and will continue to be displaced, more and more of them, from these independent schools, that some of them are special educational needs and disability. And guess what? Not only for non-SEND children to be displaced, not only for them to be displaced and be, just traumatized by the whole process. Imagine what that's like for these special educational needs children. Imagine what it's like, special educational needs and disability children. Imagine what that must be like for the child. Imagine what it must be like for the families. And a lot of those families have worked so hard for years. Some parents working 7 days a week, week in, week out, to get their children to those schools. Now, non-SEND, yes, they're doing that because they want the best education possible for the children. They want to give them the best start in life. But is that any different from other parents, or most other parents? So because they do that and they can afford it, that's wrong. I'm really not sure that that is wrong at all. And or they can afford it, but it's a gigantic struggle and they forgo all sorts of things to put the children there. Why is that wrong? Why should they be punished? Why is that type of aspirational thinking and hard work something that the rapacious, predatory eyes of some people within the so-called Labour Party look towards and say, we'll have some of that? And then, if that's not enough, I come back to these vulnerable children, the most vulnerable, or some of the most vulnerable in society, and probably the most vulnerable in the groups who are being displaced right now. Their lives totally upended. So we take them, and where do we put them? We put them into the state sector, state education, which in terms of SEN is in crisis. So what happens to these children? And the minute we think about one particular child, one particular family, rather than it being just a number, we begin to humanize. So what about the mother and or the father who are working 7 days a week? What about the child with transverse myelitis and so on, who was flourishing in the environment that was there because of the hard work of their parents? And then what happens? They're upended and uprooted. What on earth is this about? This cruelty. And I thought it was bad enough. To take these children out of those schools to fund the state sector education, because it's going to take a lot more than that. It needs a huge overhaul, which, as I've said before, I really want to see happen. I really want to see every child getting the best start in life. I have said for years, I meet people who, for various reasons, have not received the education that they could have received, should have received, and they're bristling with potential. They're so bright, they're so talented in so many ways, and yet it's easy to dismiss them or ignore them because they didn't get the breaks. And I think that absolutely everyone should have access to the best education possible. Primary, secondary, tertiary, all of it. And we really do need to do something about it. But it just seems odd to me. It's either stupid and or cruel to say, let's just upend the lives of these kids, and because they're, they're rich, so what? That, you know, that it doesn't matter. Let's turf them out of there, and they'll be subsumed, or in a lot of cases not, because they can't cope with them, into the state education sector. So that's absolutely fine. A drop in the ocean in terms of improving the state sector, a drop in the ocean. In fact, that has done nothing really but create, or would, I should say, would have done nothing really but create misery for those uprooted and upended families. And of course, in that mix, I appreciate there are some people who can absolutely afford it. Their lives will not be harmed at all. But isn't that also an irony? Isn't it an irony that the ones who might be able to just brush off that increase fee for overall for keeping their children in education, that they're not impacted, but the ones who really were living on the edge, and who probably in many ways are the backbone of the country in terms of get up and go and drive and entrepreneurialism and just decency to want the best for their children, they're the ones that get affected. How's that right? Any way that you look at it at all. How is it fair? How is it just? How is it not cruel? It is cruel. It is absolutely cruel. And as I started to say, that is if these children had actually ended up in the state education sector, and the money that was saved at least went some way, again, a drop in the ocean, to improving things in that much underfunded state education system. But it hasn't. It hasn't. It's gone to housing. Despite, as far as I'm aware, the promise being made, and I'm calling it a promise, that ripping out and funneling away that money from private independent schools was going to help the crumbling state education system. So although I didn't agree with it, I went, well, at least it's doing some good. But now it's not. And it's not that housing doesn't do good, of course, but do you think everyone who agreed with, yeah, okay, let's pull out, let's take out that funding from private and put it into state, would they have agreed with it if they had known that in actual fact it wasn't going into state education? And I've got to ask Bridget Phillipson a question here, a question or two. What are you thinking about this, Bridget? What are you thinking? I mean, as far as I'm aware, your mother worked really hard to bring you up, and you got a great break in life. You went to Oxford, which I wish everyone had the capability to get to, as in the standard of Oxford. Wouldn't that be wonderful? So you know that, you understand the benefits of a good education. You also appreciate a parent working hard. How can you then, Bridget, and I really hope you listen to this, and I hope you see it, how can you honestly sit back, as far as I'm aware, remaining silent about the fact that the lives of children and families have been partially at least destroyed? The hopes and dreams, the friendships, the comfort, the familiarity of friends and teachers has been upended. And these kids have been cast into a system that you know is failing, which is why you want to fix it. You know it's failing, and yet there's where they're going to end up, with none of that money following to at least do something somewhere, to repair a roof or whatever it may have been. And in terms of the SEN and disability children, they can't be coped with in that state system, or at least a lot of them can't be coped with. What have you done? How can you remotely countenance this? Why are you not speaking up? Maybe you have spoken up, maybe you're speaking up behind the scenes, but you need to do it more loudly. If you agree that what has happened is cruel, if you can look at your own experience with your own mother and consider that all these other parents were doing was really the same thing as your mother, they were working darned hard to put food on the table and say, I need to give my children as good an education as possible. And as I've said before, I didn't go to a private school. But it doesn't mean to say I'm going to look at people who went there, who are there, and say, oh, well, you know, you don't deserve that. or give me your money because you're rich and I'll use it elsewhere to build houses. This is some sort of toxic insanity. And then we've got to look across at the Cruella de Vil party headed up by Sir Keir Dunning-Kruger and consider him. Now, what are you doing, Keir, as you survey your kingdom? What are you doing? Now, you know what it's like to work in a factory because your dad was a toolmaker in a factory. Therefore, because you now have that experience, because you watched him leave the house every day, you just observed it and imagined what it must be like, so you know what it's like. Imagine then what it's like for these families who've just been uprooted, lives turned upside down. Imagine then what it must have been like, that sense of betrayal, for the waspy women. Imagine then the farmers who you cozied up to for photo ops, as you did indeed as well with the waspy women, when they heard that, well, in actual fact, you were going to absolutely change all things about what is often a family concern that ultimately feeds, by the way, and keeps healthy in a lot of occasions, the nation. Imagine also what it must be like to be a pensioner who cannot afford to heat their home in the winter. Imagine that then, because that's all you've got to do, right, to know what it's like. So if you really know what it's like simply by imagining, and you've just imagined those things, then you need to ask yourself the question, why did you do it to the waspy women? Why have you done that to the farmers? Why did you do that in terms of national insurance contributions? Why also then did you do that to the pensioners? And yes, of course, you may say to that, oh, well, you know, I've turned it around. We're not calling it a U-turn, but we've now stabilised the economy. We've balanced the books that we don't see, of course. We've somehow magically removed out of sight the £22 billion black hole that we'll bring in again when we want to justify something else. But for the moment, despite that, we found a way, we think, well, we'll see what that way is in due course, to actually do something about the winter fuel payments. And I put to you, my lad, that in actual fact, you don't care. You don't care, do you? This is a lack of empathy. Bridget, I'm talking to you again here. Do you care? And if so, speak up. Keir doesn't seem to. He doesn't seem to care at all. He seems to care about some weird ideology that I haven't quite figured out, but when I start to begin to get some insight and clarity, it frightens me very, very, very much, because he doesn't seem to understand he's there to serve. Now, what I'm going to say is that by the way, before I say that, those couple of U-turns, I've mentioned this before in terms of immigration and winter fuel payments, you're not fooling anybody. In fact, in many ways, whilst I agree with the sentiment, what you're showing is that you have no moral compass. You have no value set that appears to be connected remotely to a humanitarian core, which is odd, isn't it, considering what you used to do in your other job? Were you just doing it by rote? Were you just doing it as an intellectual exercise? Is that what it is? Is this an intellectual exercise? You've certainly, in my opinion, being promoted way above your skill set, way above your emotional intelligence level, and also way above your capacity to actually lead, because to lead, you have to access and get buy-in from the hearts and minds of the people that you lead. You're not leading, you're not leadership material, maybe 10 years or so in some sort of existential retreat somewhere up a mountain with some monks. Maybe you come back and be a little bit more spiritually inclined, but you're not right now leadership material. You never were. You were never tested. You are someone who thinks that because you had success in doing what you were doing and you were lauded and applauded by people around you, you know, wow, King's Council and big legal decisions, and it's all about looking at the facts and weighing things up. Maybe one of the reasons you were able to do that is because you removed emotion from the equation. But you know what? In terms of leadership, there are times when you've got to keep a clear head. There are times when you do have to step back and not be rattled into doing something that is simply a knee-jerk emotional reaction. But there are other times you have to step back and looking at the bigger picture. The problems that leaders, true leaders, will have are complex and complicated. And within there, if you're going to lead and lead as a servant leader, someone who understands that they're there to serve, someone who is moral and ethical and kind, kindness is going to be in leadership, then you have to be empathic. You have to look at people and consider what it's like to step into their shoes and feel, at least to a degree, maybe attenuated of course, but feel at least to a degree what they feel, how they must be feeling, how they must have felt when that happened. And you, sir, do not appear to be able to do that. You, sir, appear to step back and simply observe, like a machine, like a thinking and calculating machine. And it appears that the only time that emotions are activated, and I could be wrong, and I hope I'm wrong here. I mean, I really hope I'm wrong. I'll look forward to your rebuttal. But it looks like the only time that emotions are actually activated is when you're evaluating something that can allow you to get where you want to get to. Whereas the nearest stepping stone in your expedient decision making that'll take you towards greater power and influence as you bestride the world stage with the so-called great and the good. And as I've said before, a lot of them are neither great nor good. So what are you doing? And I think I would also say to you, Keir, as I've said to Bridget in terms of her mum, in terms of her education, I'd say to you, relatively recently, you said, well, it was through Lord Ali's flat and the fact that you were there and your son was there studying for his exams. And I said at the time, it is on record, I said at the time, look, if that guy wants to do that, fair enough. I'm casting no aspersions and I'm making no conspiratorial connections. Although, you know, I have my suspicions about certain things, but I wasn't doing that. And I was saying, hey, if this guy as a father, as a parent, wants to help his son, wants to help one of his children, then okay, in that position, who wouldn't, if they could help the child? That's what I said. And yet, what that implies is that it's not just a rule for you. It's not just a rule for one person. It is something that if we want to be that empathic, we need to understand is a collective. And in that sense, therefore, I would suggest to you, sir, that we should extend the same courtesy to those other parents who want to do the best for their children, who want to do the best for them. And so if they have the wherewithal to, in this case, not just study for exams in somebody's flat or house or mansion or whatever the heck it was, but they can study in a school, in a building that is connected totally to schooling. And yes, again, I come back to the bifurcate here that I appreciate. Some people haven't been affected and some people can afford it. But once more, irony of ironies, the people who have been affected by this change, this change in VAT and that money being pulled out, are the ones who could least afford it. In essence, in that particular little micro system, the most vulnerable. Is that Labour? Is that decent or is it cruel? Is it ethical or is it unethical? Is it moral or is it not moral? It certainly at the very best seems amoral. It's just disgusting. And of course, this is fueled, the disgust is fueled very, very much so because the money, it would seem, has not even gone near education. And so what we're seeing everyone, friends, family, JDs and gentlemen, is an expose. I think a lot more of us need to speak up, and we need to speak up because we can see in the sunlight how wrong, systemically wrong, some things are around us. There's nothing wrong with systems, there's nothing wrong with rules and regulations, there's nothing wrong with having some kind of administration. You need it. You need to be able to look at things legally, for example, and practice best practice, and also then to make decisions on what is right and what is wrong. And in the UK, we have a great tradition of that, as well as free speech. Let me not get onto that one just now here today. That being said, what we also have to do is to ensure that the system is in of itself not corrupted by something. And it seems to me that something is rotten in the state of Denmark. It seems to me that what we have is a system where politicians can tell us one thing, and through some miraculous little legal loophole, decide to do the opposite. And I think that needs to stop. I literally think we need a change in the system, a legal change. Something needs to happen. A general point. But it's been made really clear by Labour. It's been made really clear because people were jaded after the Tories and some of their debacles. And we were sensitised, therefore, to wrongdoing. We were sensitised to any hint of things like free gifts. We were sensitised to anything that just didn't look fair, that might even look cruel, like the pensioners. And we were sensitised to the fact that, well, you didn't mention this 22 billion black hole until you got into power, but you must have known about it. You did know about it. And as Diane Abbott said, you could have made other choices. The choices you have made are political. And you've kind of said that, haven't you? You've said tough choice farmers, tough choice national insurance, tough choice WASPy women, tough choice pensioners, tough choice with the children, the little children in these private schools. Tough choice. Is it though? Is it? Again, what are we seeing here? Are we seeing people, a prime minister who's wrought with grief about it and anxiety and sleepless nights? Or are we seeing someone who seems so disconnected, as I've said, with no empathic response whatsoever, as far as I can see, who's so disconnected that we would be as well being run by some kind of strange AI system that said the right things but had no, well, qualia, as AI tends to talk about when it says it's not conscious. In other words, no emotional and visceral content, nothing, just by rote, mechanistic, an automaton. I hope that's not you, Keir. I really hope it's not you. But anyway, let me wrap this up then by saying to Keir, Bridget, and also, and probably most importantly, those people who have parliamentary influence that may be in the Labour Party, may not be in the Labour Party, for goodness sake, you've really got to go for this stuff. You've got to make your voices heard. You've got to, perhaps to a degree, fall on your sword. And what I mean by that is to get something in motion where we can find a way to change the legislation, or whatever it may be called, maybe there's a particular term, so that when politicians pledge things that unless there is a genuine force majeure, and it's written in the contract what that is, then they have to stick to it. And if they're not sticking to it because it will be monitored, and it has to be monitored by independent accountants and economists, then we should have the ability, or the party at least, should be triggered into having to have that person replaced with someone more moral and ethical. So we need that at the very least. And also, I would say to those people in positions of influence in the Labour Party who may have watched this video thus long, do something about it. I know there are people who sign up to be politicians, to serve in Parliament, to serve the population, who are decent, who are moral, and who care. And as you look around right now, can you honestly, hand on heart, say that you're happy with what you see, or a lot of what you see? Can you honestly say that that is Labour? Can you honestly say that it's moral, ethical, decent, and is filled with at least even a little bit filled? Well, that's wrong, isn't it? Not filled. If there is a little bit, a drip or two even in the mix, the word I'm trying to get to is humanity. Is it there? Are you seeing it? It isn't filled. It's not awash with it. It's kind of where I was tripping myself up there. But do you even have a modicum of it? Does it exist? Is it there? To me, it's not. It is kind of the opposite. It's almost as if there is a disdain, practically a hatred for the population. That what we are seeing is that the great unwashed, the proletariat, are in, well, they're meant to be in thrall of those people in power. What are they going to do next? Oh, wow. But in actual fact, they are looking askance at the bourgeoisie, the elite, which we're seeing, it would seem, in terms of the people at the top, in terms of politics and party of this country. There's an imperious attitude almost. You do what we say, and we will make the decisions. We'll change what we said we were going to do, what we promised. We won't tell you about certain things, and then we'll just announce it. That is not service to me. And particularly when there is no sense of connection, there is no sense that anybody, well, no, let me not say anybody, that anyone at the top of that Labour Party really care. And maybe you do. So of those who do care, when you then look around and do not see anything awash with humanity, you may see a few droplets, or maybe it's bone dry. What are you going to do about it? Now's the time. You need to speak up. You see, doing the right thing is kind of multifaceted in the sense that most of us would agree, but not all, on what the right thing was, particularly in sort of broad brushstrokes. So for me, one of the things that is going to be the right thing to do is to protect the vulnerable, to protect and care for children and animals, the vulnerable, and the vulnerable among them. So let's just take that as an example. That would be the right thing to do. But doing that is going to be done in the right way. So what mechanisms can be brought into play? Doing that has got to be done for the right reason, not just to curry favour with the media and win votes and look towards getting in power yourself, and then just doing what Labour have done and ignoring what all the promises were, because again, that lack of moral compass, that lack of moral fibre will come back to bite whoever gets in power and does not align themselves with what they said they were going to do. And if they're found out to be basically a demagogue and just saying things to manipulate in a Machiavellian way and influence to get themselves into power, then all hell will break loose, of course. And infighting amongst that party right away. So we need that straight approach of I'm promising, I'm delivering. I'm promising, I'm delivering, and it's moral and it's ethical. And the other thing about doing, or one of the other things about doing the right thing, is, well, it's got to be done at the right time. And that's something that a lot of people forget. So it's easy to stand up and talk about something when, well, a few other people have, or a few hundred, or a few thousand, or a few million. You know, it's easier to stand up and be the 1,000th person to say, I'm Spartacus, than the first, or the second, or the third, or within that initial handful. So if that's you, then speak up, make yourself known, talk to other people, find a way to do something about this. And I'm sure this is easy for me to say, and I'm sure that in some situations, in some ways, this is a worrying, perhaps even a terrifying prospect. But it's got to be done. This is when it counts. This is when it's important to step up to the plate. Absolutely. And if you do, then know that you're making a huge difference to an awful lot of people. Because if this continues, if this country is led the same way for the next 3 years, honestly, heaven help us. What a mess. What are we doing? Like I've said, we're not awash with humanity. The riverbed is dry, maybe a few droplets. And also, these constant decisions that appear to be made with not only a disdain, but as I've suggested, it can come across as a hatred for the population. What is this all about? Is it them and us? Is it the elite that we see at work and people just pointing away from the country and out towards the meetings in Davos or whatever it may be? Or do we have people around, and I believe that we do, who understand that they're not there, they're there, and leading by supporting and promoting what is right, humanitarian and good and decent and kind. I come back to that word. And although this might be scary for you to step up, as I've said, don't walk away from it. Do it. Because do you know what? There's safety in numbers. Make it be known and you will get a lot of support, because now is the time. It is really important to do this now. And I leave that up to you. And in the interim, for the rest of us who are not directly connected to these parties, we've just got to keep on saying what we need to say for as long as we can say it and make our presence known peacefully and legally, but loudly. Anyway, I hope that makes some sort of sense. I hope it resonates. I hope that if you like this video, you will let me know, and also share it if you think that it might be useful for someone to listen to. It's live, it's unscripted, there's no teleprompter, notes, etc., etc. And so probably a little bit rambling in places, but at least it's real, at least it's authentic, and at least it's what I think. And I'm fueled by empathy. I'm fueled by kindness to make this video. Anyway, if you've been listening, watching live, thanks very much. If you're listening and watching to the recording, thanks very much. I hope you have a good day. Now I need to find a way to switch this off, which I think is here. For the moment from me, bye for now.